So I want to take a look at another new MIDI module, which is the Euclidean sequencer, MLE.euclid. So this is a little bit rough right now, but should still work out pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and open it. The first thing we're going to notice is a whole bunch of errors over here. So if you notice this is no big deal. We just need to select one of the presets to kind of initialize it. So we have our MLE.euclid. And what this does is it's going to create rhythm sequences algorithmically. And the way this works is that we're going to set a number of beats. So in this case, we're going to set 8 beats. And then we're going to select how many hits we want to fit within 8 beats. So we're controlling one of the sequencers right now. We actually have 4 identical ones, and there are 4 concentric rings on our little display. So we have 2 rings right here, 2 beats right here happening within 8 beats. And you can hear that happening in the background. If I make 3 hits, it tries to space them out as evenly as possible. Now, of course, you only have 8 pulses, so the most even spacing in this case is going to be 3, 3, 2. 3, 3, and then 2. Notice this sounds kind of musical, because this is actually one of the reasons why people love this Euclidean sequencing, is because all of these different combinations of hits and beats kind of sound like existing rhythms in a sense, which is really nice. Now I have 4 Euclidean sequencers that I can use. So I'm going to go ahead and explore a couple of these rhythm presets, which are to give you a couple of things that are predetermined. And then we can also choose different pitch presets here. So what happens here is this Euclidean sequence is always sending out a MIDI note on this pitch. So each of these rows is confined to a single pitch at a time. So you can have 4 different pitches with 4 different rhythms. If I take a look over in Ableton, right now I have a pitched instrument set up. And I'm actually going to go over to Impulse. And I'm going to throw in a... Actually, maybe I'll go to drums here and just throw in a drum rack. All right, so let's see how that works. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to select a preset. And that is not happy because I'm sending in MIDI notes that are an octave above where it's expecting. So sometimes that happens. Let's see if we can find one that is mapped correctly. Are these all going to be the same? They are all the same. Oh, here we go. I can see my MIDI notes here are really high. So there we go. So what's going on here is these MIDI notes have to be in the right range to trigger the drum rack. When the MIDI notes are like up here, for example, notice that they're triggering these element instances in the drum rack. And if we just kind of slide this up, these are what it's triggering, and there's no samples on those pads, right? So we have to make sure we're sort of in the right place in terms of MIDI notes to get it to sound correctly. Now, if I wanted to drag in an impulse instrument, it would kind of be expecting things in this range. Impulse, for whatever reason, has decided that 60 and 62 are the sort of default, or the starting point for the bass drum and the snare drum. Anyways, there's something to keep in mind. And then if you want to do a pitched instrument, then you might want to use a preset like this, where we have octaves and then a fifth and then a minor seventh to kind of make a little bit of a chord. Let's make them, let's see, so 8 and 8, and then give, so you can hear all those notes being played at one at a time. But I'm going to go back actually to a rhythm preset like this, and go back to here, and we can see we're playing all of those. I'm going to go to the view, which is here, and will enable me to set the relative volume of these. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard because it keeps jumping around, right? But if you sort of resize that. I decided I want my clave to be a little bit louder. You can hear that a little bit better. And my hi-hat to be a little bit louder as well. You can also pan them, of course, or even enable and disable them. And of course, you can MIDI map all of these things as well, right? So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of controlling the sampler. And let's go back to some of the presets here. Whoops, the presets also reset the MIDI note. So I'm going to make sure that I get this right. Do I have this? Whoops, we're still in the wrong octave because we need to be here. All right. So there's just our bass drum. And every time I click these rhythm presets, it also changes the MIDI note, so you might need to keep reselecting it. Let's explore a different relationship here. Oops, we need to... These already sound like they're a little bit offset, which I'm surprised by. There must be something weird going on, because these should actually be playing identical rhythms. But the idea here is that you can rotate them relative to each other which can be really helpful when you want to composite rhythms. So if I start adding this, which is the clave, changing the rotation can really change the feel of it. Let me go ahead and put my bass drum just down to 2. So fun to play around with is just making different combinations of beats. Right now it's looking like you really do need to set the beats number first before you can set the hits and the rotation, just manually. Okay, so one other thing that we can do, if we do decide we want to use a pitched instrument, I'm going to go back to, I've been liking this Bright Times. What happens if we do funky organ? So that's pretty low. Let's go ahead and use a pitch preset. All right, that sounds okay. We'll go here. I'm going to turn the volume up a bit. Kind of a little bit awkward because the length of each note is really obvious. And the length of the note that we're controlling with the Euclidean sequencer is not so... I don't think it's very well defined. Okay, so that sounds nice. All right, so now other thing we do is we can use our keyboard to select which MIDI notes we're playing. So what's going to happen here is every note that I play is going to select to change one note at a time. So this is going to go in order. So the first note, second note, third note, fourth note. First note, you can kind of see it changing one at a time. So you can do chords. I'm going to go up an octave. I'm kind of rolling my fingers. You probably don't really need to do that. But if you don't really care what order they are in, or if you want to mix the order up a little bit. I'm kind of playing around. It can be a lot of fun. All right, so that's just by toggling this on or off. Now notice also by default the MIDI CC is enabled, so we can go to Ableton and we can map any of these controls to our CC messages, just like we would normally. Remember that we are sending MIDI notes right now, and because we're sending MIDI notes, if we try to do a MIDI mapping, and then we select something we want to map, it's going to map those to an incoming note, right? So you see it's even like changing which note is mapped to that sort of constantly. So what that means is that we have to make sure we're not sending any MIDI notes. Maybe the easiest way to do that is just select that preset. And then we go in MIDI. We can delete that. And now, because we're not sending any notes out of Ableton, we're not going to get those MIDI notes mapped to controls. So there's something, again, to keep in mind that you need to think about. Anyways, Euclidean rhythms are a lot of fun to play around with. It's totally worth going through the presets with, especially drum sounds. I mean, Euclidean rhythm really kind of is originally was a rhythm generator. It's a lot of fun with pitched sounds, but in particular, the drums work really well. So I'm going to go and playing around with the presets is totally worth doing as well. 16 and 12 beat patterns work really well. A lot of times they end up sounding kind of Latin-y. And changing the rotation makes a big impact in the way that it sounds. That's awesome. It works out really well. So you can see building up a beat like this is really easy to do and feels really nice. Now we're in Max right now, but Max actually has a built-in MIDI mapping just like Ableton does. So if we click here and then select some of these controls, I can map them to my MIDI controllers. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of these. Easy to do. The only downside is because you don't have a registered version of Max, you can't save these mappings, I'm pretty sure. So that what it means is every time you quit, you have to remap everything. But it's pretty easy to do, so it's actually not it's not such a bad thing to get in the habit of doing. I'm going to go ahead and set all of my rotations down. Whoops, I messed up my mapping. Okay, so right now I've got one control controlling these two things. I only want, I want this knob to control this, and there's another knob I want to control this parameter. So what I can do is I can go into my mappings tab, and I can find that one. This is the one I think is wrong. I'm just gonna just turn it off. And then I'm gonna make a new mapping with the new control that I want to add. So let's see if that works. Turn this on, select the thing I want to control, send the MIDI message, and turn that off. And no, that is still not working. So to be honest, I've got no idea what's going on with that. I might need to do some research. Maybe I'm going here, I'm going to delete that. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe if I add a new mapping now. So I just couldn't map the same control to two parameters at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to turn all my rotations down. And I can also turn all my hits down and start from scratch. And just kind of build things up one at a time. Whoops, and why is it not registering my number of hits? Probably because I have the MIDI notes wrong? No. We are sending to MIDI to Ableton, right? We can see it, and we can see it generating sound here. But Ableton, for some reason, is not sending MIDI out. And the reason why is because I've mapped my volume in Ableton to the same MIDI controller that I'm using for my Euclidean sequencer now. Ugh, that was a good one. All right, so I had to unmap that to get that to work. So now I should be able to get, whoops, we're still getting a lot of stuff going on here. And that reason why is because I mapped a MIDI note because I was playing a MIDI note. Ooh. I'm sending this MIDI note into Ableton, and I must have clicked that button, that control by accident. Okay, so now I'm back here, and I can build up a rhythm. And the fun thing about this too is that once you kind of have a rhythm played, Notice that my snare drum right now is happening at the same time as the kick drum. That's kind of really boring, so I want to make sure my snare drum is offset by rotating it. And then I'm going to start playing around with some of the numbers of hits in my... so I'm noticing here that my hits for my hi-hat are not going up to 16. They should. And I think what's going on here is that I need to set 16 in all of these. And by doing that, I update these. So that's a little bit of a bug. I'll fix that at some point. Because it's actually a lot of fun to have lots of hits, especially for things like the hi-hat, right? So the fun thing about this too is it's really easy to do dramatic changes and kind of play around with the rhythm kind of in real time. All right, so I'm going to stop there. That's a lot of stuff to play with, and it's more fun to play with it on your own rather than watch me do it. But hopefully that makes sense, and you have fun with MLE.euclid.